So good evening, everyone, and welcome to this session of City Book Leaders. We are hosting the author as well as a guest.
Thanks, Matt. I think
on the book, which is Intrinsic, a manifesto to reignite our inner drive. When Sharath wrote to me about this book, I took some time to go through the back cover as well as things that are written about the book. And I found this to be very, very interesting, not because of the only fact that a lot of people have actually endorsed the book, including Dan Heath, and of course some of my favorite authors as well, like Jonah Berger, who has also endorsed the book in a very remarkable way. Anthony Seldon has written something very interesting about the book, a very noted educationalist and author. And especially I've been following Sharath on whatever social activities he's engaged in. Star Education, I'm a fan of what he has created, not only for our country, but for many other countries that he has built as a beautiful structure where the teachers have been motivated to teach over, I should say, 10 million plus children. Shall I just correct me in terms of my facts because the numbers keep growing. And when I found this book coming out, I somehow knew that this is going to be very original. And why I'm quoting original and again and again, because this is a new management theory about how you can reignite yourself. How can you feel to be engaged into whatever activity you are into? Especially the PAM model, which I don't know if I'm the only person who has coined it, but that's how I remember things. And purpose, autonomy, and mastery. So purpose is how do you find purpose in whatever you are doing? And I must tell you, it's been last week when I read the book, I have been able to find a lot of connect when I'm doing my regular transactions, when I'm interacting with people. I'm trying to find purpose in whatever decisions I must take. Are they long-term? Are they going to create an impact? And then, of course, on the autonomy and mastery. The book has a lot of amazing stories, especially Sharath's own love for Wimbledon, tennis, sports, and also as a parent when he's able to connect it to his conversations with his children. I must say these are observations, these are reflections that everyone should look at. And especially when we have people who love books, people who love reading, these are some attributes that you always tend to look in a book. And that's how you get the best of the reflections from the author, his life, and that too a very accomplished and a remarkable life. I would formally introduce Sharath to all of you. Sharath Jeevan is one of the world's leading experts on reigniting our inner drive, which he calls intrinsic motivation. He founded and led Star Education, arguably the world's largest intrinsic motivation initiative. Star reignited the motivation of more than 2 lakh teachers, 35,000 schools, and 7 million children in emerging countries. And we speak, this number keeps on growing. Sharath is currently Executive Chairman of Intrinsic Labs, which supports organizations all around the world to solve deep motivational challenges, from governments to leading UK universities and high-profile corporations. His work has been featured in many, many magazines, newspapers, journals. An accomplished speaker. You should actually watch his TED Talk that he gave at Shivnadar University a couple of months ago, I guess. That was last year, I guess. And it's a very fascinating, very unique discussion that he throws back onto the audience. So I would strongly recommend everyone to actually watch the TED Talk. We will also share the link in a while. Sharath holds degree from Cambridge University, Oxford University, and INSEAD. He was awarded an honorary doctorate for his contributions to the field of intrinsic motivation and was invited to serve on the high-level steering group of the Education Commission, the preeminent global think tank founded by former British Prime Minister Gordon Brown. He lives in London with his wife and 2 young boys. I'm assuming both of them are also Wimbledon followers and they love tennis. You can actually visit his site. You can actually follow him also on some parts of the social media where he is. And while I mentioned that he studied in INSEAD, and we were thinking whom we should call, he recommended Shalini. Shalini is one of the co-travelers in his journey while he was at INSEAD. And I'm sure there could be no better person than a classmate. And that too, while they were discussing about the purpose of life, and how the businesses should be built and what businesses shall we get onto. So today we are actually graced by Shalini, who's joining us from Bangalore. I will formally introduce all of you to Shalini. Shalini is presently the Managing Director and Country Head for Google Customer Solutions, where she is building the digital ecosystem for India. Happy birthday to Google, Shalini, which just happened a couple of days ago. Prior to her current role, she was a category director with Amazon India, yet again a company that we love because we can get our books as fast as possible from there. And also, she was a CEO for Leher Foods business. Who can deny that we have savored on those lovely snacks from Leher, where she turned around the business through business model transformation. Shalini did her bachelor's in engineering from IIT Madras, personal management from Exeter, and MBA from INSEAD. She has been honored as a Young Global Leader 2015 by the World Economic Forum. I think World Economic Forum knows how to choose the right young people. She has also been awarded the 40 under 40 Influential Leaders Award by Economic Times and Spencer Stuart in 2014, and recognized as one of the women leaders to watch in 2015. Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome both of them to this session and to every one of you who could tune in on a Friday evening, despite the fact that most of the parts of the country and other places wherever we are, and the pandemic situation is improving. People are going out. I was out sometime a few hours ago, and the kind of jam that I saw on the roads, it needs a level of motivation. And I would ask Sharath, out of the book that he has written, while he has spoken about six aspects, I would recommend him as the second edition of the book, or possibly the second volume of the book should carry something about how do we make our cities and how do we apply the principles of intrinsic motivation while doing that. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm really very thankful for all of you to join in. And now without much of ado, I would now request Sharath to present us what intrinsic is all about and take us into this lovely journey. Sharath, over to you, please.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks for all the warmth and the really kind invitation to speak today. It's such a distinguished group of people here around the room. I know some of you and some new friends as well. It's such a great honor to launch the book in India with such a great leadership group. And I think the words you used actually, Mohit, the tasty snack, that's what I'm going to try to do today, is give a little bit of a tasty snack of what the book is like. I won't make it a main course or too much, because I want you to read it in full and have your thoughts as well. But let me do my best to, in a few minutes, just share some of the key ideas there, and maybe one example of one of the chapters, just to bring it to life a bit more. I guess, for me, this was a very special few weeks, because I've always been addicted to books. I was born in Chennai. I spent many summers here. I grew up in India, but also Middle East and UK. And this was my local lending library when I was growing up. Going into very dusty shelves and picking up various kinds of books. There was lots of Enid Blyton. What else did we read? Jeeves and was all of that kind of stuff as well. And so it's so nice to see the book come out in India, as Mohit very kindly said, and in bookstores. My publisher Hachette was sharing some pics, and lovely to see some amazing people give their thoughts. I just saw your story written a review today. Vidya Shah from Edelweiss had very kindly done one, as well as global authors and so on, as well as Mohit very kindly mentioned. I spent a lot of the last 10 years in India. I'm really sad I can't join you in person. The pandemic has meant it's been a rare time. I haven't been able to travel like I used to. But I cut my teeth in this whole question of intrinsic motivation, not as an academic, not in some theory sense, but I was obsessed by this question of how do we help teachers in schools across India rekindle their motivation and passion again to teach. And we started in the slums of Delhi, in places like Selampur and Shadra and so on. But very quickly, the model expanded to about 30,000 schools across India. We engaged about 2 lakh teachers, about 60 lakh kids. And what I realized from that whole experience was that although there was a lot of academic research on these principles of purpose, autonomy, mastery, the PAM, as Mohit said, I'll dive into this in a second, there was almost nothing to help guide me in practice. This was one of probably the 10 hardest years of my life professionally, trying to figure out what do I do, how do I do this, and do this in a big school system with the Indian government as my main partner, very challenging for you. I'm very proud of the achievement. But I think that really inspired me to believe, look, there's so much I'm learning by doing here. How can I share these ideas with others and really apply it to all of the key aspects of our lives? That's kind of just a little bit about the inspiration of Intrinsic. And I was thinking, before today, what's the best image to summarize these last 20 months, and especially in India, these last 6-8 months have been so challenging. And you mentioned the traffic, Mohit, but even that's a nice sign in some ways, right, relative to what we've been seeing over these last few months. And I have so many friends, family, former colleagues across India, and it's been really, very, very moving to hear their stories of who's been affected. So I was taking my kids to the beach in the UK. It's slightly opened up here in the UK as well, like India. And I was thinking about this image of treading water. And I sort of feel like, we've been treading water motivationally for a while through this period. It's been, kids in our country have not been in physical school for almost 2 years in some cases. And, many of us, those of us in the room here are relatively lucky. I think we've got, luckily, our health intact. We've been able to keep our jobs, etc. in most cases. But it's not been an easy period. And almost all of us know someone who's been affected. And the thing with treading water is that we can only tread water so long before we drown. And we've got to start swimming again motivationally. And that's really the idea of the book, is how can we try and live a better life, a happier life, a more fulfilling life, and really make the most of this precious time we have on this earth. And the core insight that runs through the book is this idea that what deeply motivates us is not the opposite of what demotivates us. Let me just repeat that. What deeply motivates us is not the opposite of what demotivates us. So things like money, status, how fancy the coffee machine is, whether we get a coffee day or another brand in the office, all that stuff, yes, it is helpful. We all need to put bread on the table. We need to feed our families. We need to feel we're fairly treated and paid, for example. But these are what motivation thinking calls hygiene factors. So things that they're important, but they're not deep motivators. And just to give a real example, I was talking to a trader in London, where I'm based, in the city of London. He got a £20 million bonus. I didn't want to even translate that into rupees, but a crazy amount of money. And the first thing he said, didn't look happy. I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Look, I heard by the water cooler, someone next door to me got 21 million." Right? So we learned these things have diminishing effects. And teachers in India have had very sharp increases in the government system in pay. That's not led to much in terms of their motivation going up. So these are important, but they're not deep motivators. And I spent a lot of time in India in cars like this is in Bombay, of course, but I kind of think a lot about this as an image for motivation for me. And I think about the fuel in the car being a bit like the kind of motivation that fuels our lives. This car is on diesel. You get from A to B for sure, but it's not a very pleasant ride, right? We're choked by the fumes along the way. And intrinsic motivation, by contrast, is like driving an electric car. It feels like gliding, it's smooth, it's pleasurable. And what we're learning about motivation, it's a bit like good cholesterol, bad cholesterol. The more we can live our life by intrinsic principles, the more likely we'll be happy, fulfilled, and ultimately successful over the longer term. And taking that car analogy to the next level, I think about purpose, as Mohit alluded to, really that sense of how what we do helps and serves others. That's like the destination we put into the GPS in our cars. Many taxis now have GPSs, of course. Autonomy is being at the wheel of our lives, of the car. And in India, of course, there's always someone in the backseat telling us how to drive. It's still that sense that we can drive this in the way we want to. And mastery is getting better and better as a driver. Mohit mentioned the even more clogged streets now, with everything from passenger, pedestrians all the way to bikes. It's not easy, but how do we become a better and better driver over time? So these three pillars: purpose, autonomy, mastery. We know this is what deeply motivates us in almost every aspect of our lives. What I looked in the book is at 5 key areas. I'll just touch on them briefly. 5 crises in motivation I believe we're in. The first one is at work, and I think the pandemic has made us really think about what the role of work is in our lives. 85% of us are either disengaged or actively disengaged in the world of work. We are going to be working, though, about 90,000 hours over our lifetimes. And this is a huge waste of human potential. So the first thing I looked at in the book is how can we try to reignite our motivational work? It's right now a very cynical, very jaded place. How can we really make it a joyful one where we really express ourselves at work? The second area I'll talk about more is this question of success and talent. The third area I looked at is our relationship. So I talked to relationship counselors in places like Chennai, for example, who are just saying that the couples are completely lost. I talked to infertility specialists who basically said, couples in many Indian cities now don't have time for sex, right? And the fear of breakup is meaning that many of us are not meeting the right romantic partner or able to keep our romantic relationship intact. I looked at how we can use motivation thinking to improve that. As Mohit said, I'm the father of 2 young boys, and I struggle with this every day. But what I know for sure from all the research is that our current ways of parenting, and I think many metros in India are very similar to London or New York now. We shuttle our kids into extra tuition classes. We bombard them with extracurricular activities, and they're highly structured childhoods. This is not a good thing. This is causing a lot of anxiety, depression, even suicide among our young kids. And I looked at Palo Alto in America, where they had to put armed guards on the tracks of trains there to stop young people jumping onto the tracks. And these kids are the kids of the top 1% of America's elite, the Facebook or Amazon execs and so on, or Google execs and so on. So that idea that we need to rethink our approach to parenting. And finally, I spent a lot of time in places like this is at the House of Commons in the UK, but talking to our politicians around the world, and they are at incredibly low levels of motivation right now. They feel like they're serving factions of their country, not the whole country. And as citizens, our trust of our elected leaders is now at the same level as advertising executives. So that dialogue between citizens and our leaders is broken in almost all our countries. And I looked at how can we try to use motivation thinking to break it back. So those are the 5 motivational crises that the book talks about and tries to find solutions to. It's an optimistic book, though. I just want to really stress that, but I believe we can find a new deal in all of these 5 aspects of our lives. And what I'll do today in terms of the snack, if you like, is just talk a little bit about one of the themes, this question about success and talent. And Mohit said this is one of his favorite books, parts of the book, so it was nice to choose that. This is ABBA. I don't know if any of you were born. I was a child of the 70s, but this song, "The Winner Takes It All," was a very apt description of the problem we're in, right? And as an example of that, I mentioned I'm a huge tennis fan, and I'm one of my Jaydeep, who runs the Tennis Association, is on my advisory council for Intrinsic Labs. But I looked at Roger Federer. I'm a huge Federer fan, I should say. He pocketed $300 million at the age of 37, at the twilight of his career, with the Japanese fashion giant Uniqlo. I talked, though, to the professional tour, to players who are 100 in the world, 120 in the world. They're barely able to make ends meet on the tour. By the time you add travel and costs and lodging and all this stuff. And, I took my sister-in-law to Wimbledon, and she's not a tennis fan. She could barely make out the difference between one of those players, 120 in the world, and one of the top 10. If I didn't tell her who they were, she had no idea from how they played. They're so close in performance, and yet there's such a winner-takes-all outcome in terms of how they're paid. And, you see this every time in India, from the airport, Uber driver, I'd be looking at this guy in the camp and saying, God, this guy could have been doing so many great things if we'd been able to give him that potential. And this idea of accumulated advantage is one of the ideas that I talk about more in the book. Malcolm Gladwell mentioned this term initially. But, things like, Black Lives Matter, which happened in the US, but, across the world, this question about this real sense that, many of us in our world today, we feel like we're in organizations and societies where our talents are not recognized, let alone nurtured. That's true for, even more true for women, for minorities of every kind. But all of us, I think that's a universal feeling today. And this problem of opportunity hoarding, that a few of us get access to more and more opportunities, whereas most of us are cut off from those things. And just to give an example, I'm a big LinkedIn user, and please do connect me on LinkedIn if you use it. But the idea of LinkedIn initially was to open up networks, right, make them more democratic. In fact, the opposite is happening. So that if you already know someone on LinkedIn, you're 6 times more likely to get a referral. So those of us who already have a big network will get a bigger and bigger network. If you're not networked at all, it's almost impossible to make much of a splash on LinkedIn. On Amazon, if you're already in the top 10 in books, your book will do better and better and better. If you're not on the top 10, so it's that classic winner takes all dynamic. And what that's making us all feel like is this kind of question of the survival of the fittest. Corporate India, it's a pretty, let's be honest, pretty brutal place at times. And all this competition, this jockeying for seniority and hikes, salary hikes and promotions. I know some HR ladies in the room, so I'm curious to hear your thoughts, but these are not generally very benign places, right? And I went back to read Charles Darwin. For the book, and his Origin of Species was in corporate India, talked to me about that idea. Actually, what Darwin meant was not that we need to be bigger, stronger, and outmuscle our competitors in the corporate world. What he meant was he was talking about diversity. What he was saying was that if we are diverse in terms of our talents, our strengths, we will help the whole human race be more diverse, and it's more likely to survive over time. So what I looked at a lot in this was this whole question of how do we really fight against this winner-takes-all world? And the key insights seem to be about the value of what I call talent nurturers. And what's hard is if you go to a company, you can't tell the difference by title. Someone might be called an HR leader, a business leader, etc. But nurturers and managers are 2 very different species almost. And the key difference is talent nurturers take talent owners to places they wouldn't have got to otherwise. And let me give a couple of examples of that phenomenon. So this is Stockholm, where the Nobel Prize is given every year. I looked at the chance of you winning a Nobel Prize if your mentor was also a Nobel Prize winner. And the chance of you getting one was twice as high if your mentor exhibited certain nurturing behaviors. And that was even though both, whether they would have a Nobel Prize already, what really predicted your success was how they behaved towards you in terms of their nurturing. Just another example, this is a restaurant in London. There's great South Indian and Sri Lankan food. It's called Hoppas. I looked at the restaurant group chain that tried to nurture new entrepreneurs into the restaurant industry and found they could take people off the street who had great Taiwanese chicken buns or amazing Iranian food. And they would nurture those entrepreneurs to found restaurants and restaurant chains that were really popular and distinctive. So what I found is, using those pillars of purpose of autonomy and mastery, really key motivational differences between nurturers and just managers. On purpose, the nurturers really saw the potential in everyone. They helped nurturees become the best versions of themselves. They didn't try to force them to become someone else. They really saw keeping that the person they were nurturing in love with the activity itself as really critical. And they built networks and connections so that the people they were nurturing could open up new possibilities. And finally, they helped really, they didn't try and give answers. They tried to ask the right questions at the right time. It was almost a coaching approach. And they were very selfless as a nurturer. So I talk in the book about the teacher. I did my undergrad at Cambridge, as Mohit said. My teacher helped me get into Cambridge. I left the school because of he was such a good nurturer, studied a different subject at university. He still kept in touch with me. I was very proud of my progress, even though I didn't do the path maybe in his heart of hearts he would have wanted. And nurturers also keep investing in their expertise over time. So these are the 5 motivational crises we're in. Just really excited to learn, to talk more today. Please stay in touch, as Mohit said, but just really really excited to have the book out in India and very honored to be here with you all as well. I hope this gives a little bit of a flavor of the snack to know in its words. Thank you.
Wow, fantastic, Sharath. I think you just covered the book as if the author is giving a review of the book, which I'm sure now you have made the task of Shalini slightly difficult. but I'm sure she has many other perspectives to look at the book, especially while she is serving at an organization which we actually thought is meant to search, but it's actually beyond that. So, Shalini, why don't you tell us something more about what actually inspired you in this book and some of the anecdotes that you can relate in your work as well as your personal life? And we all can see you have a beautiful background that actually tells about the setting you are sitting right now. So, take us through that.
Thank you, Mohit. Sharath, I must say it was such brilliant, uh, a brilliant condensation of the book, a book that I truly loved. Um, so I let me before I start, let me talk about the time when Sharath actually spoke with me early on about his book, Intrinsic, a manifesto to reignite your inner drive. My first reaction was, who better than Sharath to do this? I've seen Sharath in action, enabling intrinsic motivation amongst more than 2 lakh teachers over the last 15 years, is it, Sharath? Knowing Sharath and his ability to understand deeply and not just understand deeply, but also explain in simple terms, I expected a wonderful book. In Intrinsic, my expectations were truly blown away by not just the passion, but the originality of thought. As you rightly said, Mohit, this is an entirely new way of looking at not just the field of management, but life. Mm, the ability to build narratives with examples across board from sports, tennis definitely, but to bartending or conversations with cricket dads. It was it was the way to ease the narrative, and the storytelling was immense. Um, I could hear Sharath uh, speaking about this over a cup of coffee. The book captures you right at the beginning with the mental model of purpose, autonomy, and mastery. I loved the way purpose was defined as destination on your GPS. Like, I would prefer Google Map, but destination on GPS. Autonomy is your ability, whether you are driving the car, and mastery is as do you have the skill to drive it well and build on it. I loved the analogy right at the beginning. Uh, Sharath calls this an optimistic book, and it is. Through stories that, I mean, they really stuck with me. Sharath defines what good looks like. I loved the story of Dr. Ravindra Gupta, who was able to get all the three and be on the path to find a cure for HIV. I think it's such a powerful story. Thank you, Sharath, for bringing this out. Sharath, through the book, through the three aspects of purpose, autonomy, and mastery, and the five contexts, continues to define what good looks like. In his defining of purpose, I loved the way yeah, how he perceived people who are actually powerless, seem powerless in our worlds, um, find purpose. The two stories that I truly loved were that of Iblis, the bartender, who sees his purpose as building rapport amongst his customers. And this is such a heartwarming story about him creating such a good time between a father and a daughter and making the father cool in front of his daughter in an afternoon. Um, I thought that was such a wonderful story. The other one, and while he talks about a very personal story there, he brings in a well known story in parallel of JFK and a janitor at NASA. All of us have heard that story where JFK goes and asks the janitor at NASA what he does, and the janitor says, of course, send the man to the moon. Um, and through this, he builds uh, the story. He builds the purpose, or he builds purpose, and how as organizations we can build purpose amongst our leaders across the spectrum. I love the way autonomy was brought to life across the board through various stories, but truly the gritty stories of Stir. For me, those gritty stories of Stir were so close to my heart because right at the beginning, 14 years back, I saw those stories with Sharath in those schools and teachers in Shadra. I was a cynic, and a few visits with Sharath and his team changed the way I looked at intrinsic motivation and how we could build it. And finally, mastery. I've read, like all of us, many books for and against specialization. I've understood the theories of it. Michael Gladwell on one end, the other end being Range, the latest one. For me, what was brought to life here is the story of Federer again, which Sharath talked about. But this is just the beginning. Sharath not just builds us a case for goodness, but he builds us cases where organizations, people, communities have been able to build them. He showed us how we can truly, as practitioners, build them in whichever context we are in. It brings in not just clear reasoning as to why, but on how. Sharath, congratulations on not just writing an optimistic book, but a guide to an optimistic world. Thank you.
Thank you, Shalini. I think what you just spoke in the last couple of minutes not only summarizes the book, but you've also given a great hint to the people who could join on this call and all the people who will watch it in the digital world. And who better than you to actually tell how it amplifies on the digital in the digital world. I think what you have given is the knack of storytelling that Sharath carries, and I was blown up by the way each and every chapter has been sewn in. All the sinews come back. Everything is created into a powerful muscle, and this book definitely takes us back into a thinking mode, and also the application that we can do whatever we do in our life. So Sharath, I have. Okay, sorry. Deepak has a question, so let him ask. Mr. Barara, you may please ask a question.
Mike, you read it, no issues.
Okay.
I saw in the chat as well. So I wish I'd have to say this as well. You're very, very honest man, Deepak, as well. I know the recording's off, but so Deepak, I think one of the things that I really observe this a lot. So if you look at marriage rates in the West, but also in India, interesting, they're coming down a lot because I think there's a real fear of relationship breakdown happening. I talk to marriage counselors around the world for the research, and I think what I found very interesting with this is if you look at perhaps I say the generation above my age, I'm 45, just to be very transparent to my age. There was a lot of family support in relationships, right? In metros, you lived often in an extended family. You had a number of influences, and that that had some mixed blessings. The Indian mother-in-law became that fabled sort of figure in history and so on as well. But there was also a lot of support with that. Now I think as couples have become more nuclear, living in nuclear families, and very stressful commutes, all of the challenges of living in a metro nowadays, of course, I think there's a real sense of isolation happening. And so what I observed and talked about in the book is how we now expect our significant other, our husband, wife, or serious girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, to be our our life coach, our financial guru, our friend, our soulmate, our confidant, our And it's unrealistic to expect that of one person. And so one of the arguments in the book is we need to rethink the purpose of a serious relationship and think of it much more about providing emotional safety for each of us. So I was talking in the book about, I've worked for about 25 years after university. I've probably made at least 4, maybe 5 career changes. I went from a very well paid, very high flying, business class flying, management consultant after INSEAD to running an NGO, basically spending hours in slums across Delhi or other parts of the country. And it's I was very lucky to have a wife who didn't have her notion of me wrapped in a external identity, of like, this is the person I married, they have to say the same. It's hard to have that emotional safety though nowadays. And I think a lot of people I talk to, they really feel that, if I want to be different, I want to try and be a different version of myself, I'm worried about whether my partner will support me. And so that idea of being able to listen to our partners, to find that quiet time, because often when we're hearing our most intimate thoughts and there's no kind of State of the Union address, there's no quarterly earnings report, you might be, dropping the kids off in school in the car or doing an errand in the house, and suddenly something comes out from your partner. How do we stay attentive to those signals and be there for them at that time? That's one of the one of the big chapters in the book there. And thanks, Deep. I'm reassured about your comment there in the chat. But just saying more generally, I think I've certainly struggled with this in my my marriage at times. I think many of us are going through these challenges there.
Fantastic. So, Sharath, before anything else also comes up, I want you to actually tell about the 4 nurturers that you have mentioned in the book. And that's a very remarkable, original, qualitative thinking that has been done while you would have thought about the 4 nurturers. What kind of that attributes are while we nurture any kind of talent, especially in mentoring. And that's a very unique one, if you can quickly tell something more about it.
Yeah, thanks. So I think what I observed, might just make it real again. My son is 10. He's applying for secondary schools, high schools in now. And it feels like, I live in London, but every school basically wants to skim the best kids, right? All they want to do is select. And they have these entrance exams. We've got this crazy culture now of tuition that's almost as bad as India. We're going backwards, but that's what they want to do, so they can appear, highly on a league table and exam table and so on. But many schools don't want to actually do the work of real nurturing, where they take a child, a young person, and help them to get to that place where they wouldn't have got to otherwise, right? The selection game is a much easier game. And I'd say, I'm talking to so many leaders in corporate India and corporate anywhere, that mentality of this war for talent, when Shalini and I were in INSEAD, that was the buzzword. And then Enron was the ultimate example of that. Then we saw what happened there. But that idea that, there's a few people out there who've got all these, the superstar mentality, right? Our job is to find them. And I don't know, Shalini, if you would agree, but I found that a completely misguided mental model of talent. That actually, really, we want people who are deeply motivated by purpose, that align with the purpose of our organizations, that will do whatever it takes to really serve our clients, customers, whatever, well, that really want to develop over time, that have growth mindset, that those human characteristics are so much more important. I talk to so many CEOs around the world, and they'll say, Sharath, look, I hire for skills, I fire for values. And I think that's the kind of idea. So, but to do that, we've got to be much more patient ourselves and see our jobs as being a nurturer. And often as mentors, there are many great mentors across India and many fields that I've come across. It's almost never seen as part of their job. They do it at the night, 10 o'clock in the evening, they'll be on a phone call, a WhatsApp chat, early breakfast. But if you're a leader at all, a good amount of your time should be about exhibiting those nurturing behaviors, about keeping that person engaged, learning, developing, helping them get to that place they wouldn't have got to otherwise. So I think we need a radical reshift in how we think about corporate culture now to incorporate these ideas of nurturing. Shalini, would you agree? What are your thoughts?
Completely agree. And however, I'm very, I'm right now actually very optimistic of the future, Sharath. I was just telling you that when we talk to millennials, the topmost thing that drives them is actually purpose. If they come to work to make a difference in my organization, to enable digital transformation, right? And I think that defines the new generation. I believe we belong to a cynical generation, and I'm hoping for a better and a more positive and an optimistic generation. And I also think the newer organizations, like the current one that I'm in, mentoring is actually a part of your job, and that's the part that I'm loving as a part of this role. Um, uh, how your team rates you reflects on you as a leader. I think that um, makes some of these organizations uh, the good that they are.
Okay, thank you, Shalini. We have a question from Vice and Muralidharan. Sir, why don't you please ask your question?
Yeah. Sharath, actually, I've been very fascinated by what you presented. And, I have an observation. When you said about nurturing, it's a term that, not very commonly used, but being from the armed forces, especially the Navy, it is something we have done all our life, because as a commanding officer of a ship, or as you grow higher, you actually have to try and nurture your juniors to come up to the level. Because the day you try and do everything yourself, you will not succeed as a team. I think that's what your theme is. You got to nurture the boy or youngster to come up to the level and perform. And quite often you got to stand in the background and make him do and step in when you think things are going wrong. So I think that is something which I think all organizations, I think you have brought out very clearly that. And the other aspect is, I find one thing now that, there is a tendency among, I may be wrong because I think Shalini has given a different perspective, among youngsters to stop reading. They're not, when you showed the book and when you talked of the ABBA and all that, like I grew up slightly earlier with the Beatles generation, and we grew up, I'm probably about 2 decades or little 2 decades plus ahead of you from what the dates you said. But the fact is, and we still had old Jim Reeves going around and things like that. But the fact is, I find there's a lack of tendency to read. Maybe technology, I'm not saying, you read your books on the net, whatever it is, but that. And one more thing that has happened is, I may be again wrong, but I find, for example, Economist now, instead of print edition, they also got a digital edition. And most of the things, they got a podcast, listen to his own podcast. So people of my generation, actually, if you don't read, if you're only listening to it, it doesn't, strike you, or I feel it doesn't that much of it. So what is your feelings on this? How do we encourage youngsters to get into reading habits?
It's a really great point. And just to say, a lot of my best hires, I think Shalini met Nikita and other colleagues of mine at Stir, they were all army kids. It's incredible because they had that, because they traveled around the country, they had, that very, to fit into different cultures. They were incredibly successful in roles in India that I found. So just to reinforce what he said. But exactly. So I think about, what's the core now in being a young person? Obviously to be caring and compassionate, but also to master this muscle of lifelong learning and to genuinely love learning, whether that's on a podcast or a book. I think that's a more open question. But what I'm finding that's happening is our education systems, not just in India, but everywhere in the world, they're pulling in a more and more in the opposite direction. So I talk in the book about a kind world and a wicked world. And a kind world is a world where there is a stable technical solution to a problem. So Elon Musk getting to Mars through SpaceX, very complex problem, but there is a technical solution. The pandemic, there is no kind problem, right? We had to feel our way, so many factors in. The world that we live in is becoming more and more wicked over time, as these 20 months and these 6 months have shown us. Unfortunately, our education systems are becoming more and more kind. Not kind, unfortunately, in terms of systems of kindness, but they're asking us, to more and more routinize things, to memorize things more, to regurgitate stuff, mug up stuff, learn the portions, all these things. And I think it's almost coming to a point now where I think many employers around the world are almost saying our education system is close to useless for what the future of work will look like. It's training kids in things that are going to be automated. It's the human skills, where I talk about in the book, the broader mastery essentials of work that are going to distinguish us. Doctors are not going to be doing that many procedures in the future. They're going to be helping shepherd patients through treatments and diagnoses and the emotional journey of being a patient, everything we're doing in education is going in exactly the opposite direction. So I don't think our young people are to blame, honestly. I think we as parents have got to have more voice. I think we've allowed our politicians, our leaders to tell us what's right. I think we all work and we all see the world as it is. I think we need to demand for a better system of education that really nurtures these things and really gets our kids to love learning, because they'll need to keep reinventing themselves all through their life, and they need to develop that intrinsic motivation themselves. Just to one last thing, that just to back up, and I'll love to hear your thoughts, but I think what we do as parents to role model that matters so much. So I have a very close friend, he's Indian. He lost his job recently. He's like mid-40s. Many of us are losing or will lose jobs. He didn't tell his son for 2 weeks. And I was saying to him, look, what does that say? That means that the moment something goes wrong, there's a setback, we're going to hide it from the people that we care most about. We're going to show that failure is a bad thing, right? We all fail. So I applied to a fellowship in the US recently. I didn't get it. And I remember I told my kids, because they were very excited about spending a few months in LA and all this stuff, and obviously it didn't happen. But I think they saw me look a bit dejected at the dinner table that day. But 2 days later, I was back on my feet, and you get on with life and do the next thing. I think it's so important that we role model that life is that. I talk in the book, the zigzag, not the straight line. But we need to change our behavior and show that every day, so our kids absorb that as well.
This has been a great 60 minutes spent. I always remember 60 minutes because from my days, because you mentioned ABBA and Vice and Muralidharan also mentioned about Beatles. I must say I am from that generation where the 60-minute cassette used to be a luxury, and 60 minutes and that to 30 minutes this side, 30 minutes that side, and manually you had to change each side. And technology is growing up, and that's yet again a very interesting way of looking at how we spend our times. And as a question that came, that how can we inculcate the habit of reading, and especially to you, Shalini, when you come from a company that is not only now distributing books, but also making a lot out of the books, and now with Google Books. By the way, I'm one of the fans of Google Books, because books that are not found on Amazon are easily available. Most of the times are available on Google Books. I have that app alongside the Amazon app. So I must say these are the organizations, these are the innovations, and also possibly people like us at City Book Leaders, or what we do as friends of books. The idea is, can we actually form small micro communities to talk about such subjects and take them back to our families? So possibly tonight, when you go back, when you have your dinner, do talk about this book, and don't ask that question that Mr. Barara was asking. I'm happy, but my wife doesn't allow me to be happy. This book might not be able to help you. You may need to go back to many other books for that. So with that, I think it's a beautiful time spent, Sharath, and thanks for sparing out time. And to you, Shalini, for taking out time, that too on a weekday, while we understand you have the responsibilities. And to every one of you who could join in, and I'm really thankful. Thank you to everyone. Thank you, Shalini. And we shall stay in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.